Imagine for a moment that you build a towering, magnificent estate. You lay every single brick by hand.
Right.
You carve your own name above the heavy oak doors. You pour your entire soul into the architecture, and you invite the entire world inside to marvel at what you've created.
It becomes a monument to your own resilience.
Exactly. But slowly, room by room, you are forced to sell off the keys just to keep the lights on. The maintenance becomes too heavy. The structural demands they're just too complex.
So you start diluting your own ownership just to patch the roof.
Yeah. Until one day you wake up standing on the sidewalk in the freezing rain.
Yeah.
The locks have been changed. The estate you build is now worth billions of dollars.
And you can't even get inside.
Worse than that.
Whoa.
A court order dictates that you are no longer legally allowed to even speak the name carved above the door. Because that name, your birth name, now belongs to someone else.
It's a deeply unsettling reality.
It is. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are adopting the investigative mantle of peak to dust. This is our documentary-style format where we conduct a serious historical post-mortem into the rise, the fracture, and the ultimate fragmentation of the giants of history.
And our mission in this deep dive is not, to recount a sweet, nostalgic American success story.
No. We are here to conduct a forensic examination of a corporate tragedy.
The source material before us is extensive, and it is deeply sobering.
Right. We're pulling from a collection of recent obituaries following the founder's death in August 2024. We have exhaustive historical retrospectives from the food industry.
We also have precise financial reports detailing decades of leveraged buyouts.
And the stark legal summaries that permanently severed a man from his own likeness.
It is a narrative that perfectly illustrates the unforgiving mechanics of the snack food industry and really commerce at large.
So we need to establish a strict analytical framework today.
We will dissect how a man who broke the color barrier in the brutal, aggressively guarded talent industry of the 1960s weaponized that exact experience to revolutionize the boutique cookie market in the 1970s.
We'll examine how he engineered unparalleled cultural dominance, leveraging absolute premium quality and, frankly, personal charisma.
But more importantly, we will analyze the operational deficits that turned his rapid expansion into a fatal liability.
Right. Ultimately, we will trace the precise financial and legal mechanisms, the leverage buyouts, the margin compressions, the trademark litigations.
The exact mechanisms that stripped him of the right to his own face and name.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before there was a sprawling commercial empire, before the multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, there was Wallace Amos Jr., Wally Amos.
To understand the genesis of this brand, you really have to understand the stark socioeconomic realities of his early life.
Born on July 1st, 1936 in Tallahassee, Florida, Amos was raised in an environment characterized by immense systemic and economic friction.
His father worked grueling hours for an electric utility company.
And his mother, Ruby, was an illiterate domestic worker, navigating the incredibly harsh realities of the Jim Crow South.
Wally himself struggled profoundly with literacy. He didn't actually learn to read until much later in his childhood.
Right. And then, when his parents separated in 1948, the 12-year-old was uprooted. He was sent away from everything he knew in Florida to navigate the post-war urban density of New York City.
He was sent to live in Harlem with his aunt, Della Bryan.
Aunt Della.
Yes. And if we want to trace the structural foundation of the future famous Amos empire, we have to look closely at Aunt Della's apartment.
It wasn't a place of monetary wealth.
No, but it offered something far more vital for a displaced, illiterate 12-year-old. It offered absolute, unwavering stability.
Because she baked homemade chocolate chip and pecan cookies.
Exactly. And in the context of his traumatic dislocation, those cookies were not merely a snack, they were a profound emotional anchor.
They represented safety, affection, consistency.
Yeah. Amos would later state in interviews that Aunt Della's home was rich in the principles vital to a child's upbringing, an environment entirely defined by the aroma of her baking.
That sensory connection between baked goods and authentic, undeniable comfort became the psychological blueprint for his entire future enterprise.
But the trajectory from Aunt Della's kitchen in Harlem to corporate dominance in Los Angeles was anything but linear.
No, it was forged through a series of demanding, low-wage experiences. Experiences that instilled a ferocious work ethic.
He initially enrolled at the Food Trades Vocational High School. He studied the discipline mechanics of culinary arts for 2 years.
But the traditional educational system failed to hold him. He dropped out during his senior year.
After earning his GED and completing a 4-year stint in the United States Air Force, where he was actually stationed in Hawaii, he returned to the abrasive economic reality of New York in 1957.
He took a job in the stockroom at Saks Fifth Avenue, and he was consistently underpaid.
He was repeatedly denied raises despite outworking his peers.
Right. Recognizing the ceiling that had been placed over him, he just abandoned the retail sector entirely. He set his sights on the entertainment industry.
Starting at the absolute bottom, the mailroom of the highly prestigious, intensely competitive William Morris Agency.
If you want to understand the strategic genius that Wally Amos later brought to the consumer packaged goods sector, you must first study his tenure at William Morris.
The talent agency business in the late 1950s and early 1960s was an overwhelmingly white, fiercely guarded institution.
It was an industry built on leverage, perception, and ruthless negotiation.
And through sheer tenacity, an unparalleled work ethic, and an extraordinary ability to read the psychological needs of the people around him, Amos navigated this hostile landscape.
In 1962, following a rapid, undeniable series of promotions, he achieved something historic.
He broke the color barrier. He became the first black talent agent in the history of the William Morris Agency.
And he didn't just quietly occupy that space. He aggressively defined it.
He was tasked with heading the agency's newly formed rock and roll department, at a time when the establishment viewed rock music as a fleeting, low-class trend.
He saw the cultural shift before the executives did. I mean, he discovered and signed Simon and Garfunkel.
He worked with a towering roster of mid-century legends, the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, Sam Cooke, Diana Ross, Dionne Warwick.
He was negotiating contracts for the actual architects of American pop culture.
Which brings us to the core mechanism of his future success. Amos's background in the high-stakes entertainment industry directly informed his eventual culinary business strategy.
Right. He learned how to manufacture a star.
He understood the mechanics of promotion, the psychology of commanding attention in a saturated market, and the absolute power of narrative.
He knew how to make people care about a product before they even consumed it.
But the talent industry is inherently parasitic, and by 1967, the relentless pressure had really taken its toll.
He grew deeply disillusioned with the corporate machinery of William Morris. So he resigned. He relocated to Los Angeles.
He attempted to set up his own personal management company, initially staking his reputation on managing the South African trumpeter Hugh Masekela.
But that venture was a catastrophic failure. Masekela eventually dropped him.
Amos suddenly found himself stranded in Los Angeles. He was burdened with mounting debt. His independent business was failing.
And his personal life was in severe upheaval. He was a newly divorced father.
It is in this specific crucible of immense professional and financial distress that the origin story of the brand truly begins.
He didn't turn to market research or venture capital. He returned to the psychological anchor of his childhood in Harlem.
He began baking chocolate chip cookies, using a heavily modified version of Aunt Della's recipe.
Explicitly as a coping mechanism to relieve extreme stress.
He actually described the physical act of measuring, mixing, and baking to the New York Times as a necessary form of therapy, a way to survive the collapse of his management firm.
Yet, even in the depths of professional failure, the innate instincts of a William Morris talent agent remained active.
He recognized a unique psychological leverage in those cookies. He began using them as literal calling cards.
He would attend high-stakes meetings with skeptical record company executives, hardened movie producers in Hollywood.
And he would bypass the traditional aggressive posturing of a pitch meeting by bringing a tin of his homemade cookies.
The strategy was entirely ingenious. In an industry built on superficial interactions, false promises, and abrasive negotiations, Amos offered an immediate, visceral experience of authenticity and comfort.
He disarmed executives with a product of exceptionally high, handmade quality.
The psychological disruption was so effective that the demand for the cookies among the Hollywood elite soon eclipsed the demand for his actual talent management services.
That dynamic forces a critical pivot. March 10, 1975. Amos decides to abandon talent management entirely and monetize the calling card.
He leverages his remaining entertainment contacts to secure $25,000 in seed money.
And the capitalization table of this initial venture reads like a Grammy Awards seating chart.
He secured $10,000 directly from Marvin Gaye.
He pulled in additional funds from the singer Helen Reddy and her husband, the producer Jeff Wald.
With this capital, he scouts a location for his first freestanding retail store. And the geography he selects is a fascinating study in commercial contrasts.
It was a highly calculated risk. He secured a lease at 7181 Sunset Boulevard on the corner of Formosa Avenue.
occupying the site of a defunct house of pies.
You have to strip away the modern, sanitized image of Los Angeles retail and picture the Sunset Strip in 1975.
It was a gritty, unpredictable, and often dangerous environment.
His son, Sean Amos, who would later spend his childhood working the front of the shop, standing on milk crates to reach the register, recalled the severe reality of the location.
The east side of Sunset at that time was incredibly seedy. Prostitutes openly worked the sidewalks.
The storefront was situated directly across the street from a heavily trafficked strip joint.
The store itself was actually held up at gunpoint on multiple occasions. It was not a hospitable environment for a premium boutique bakery.
But Amos was looking at a different map entirely. He saw beyond the immediate street-level decay.
That specific intersection on Sunset was just a few blocks down from the A&M Records loft.
Exactly. It placed his store at the absolute geographic epicenter of the Los Angeles music industry's daily commute.
And he did not launch this bakery with a quiet ribbon-cutting ceremony. He orchestrated the grand opening with the precise theatricality of a major Hollywood film premiere.
It was a star-studded, chaotic gala attended by an estimated 1,500 people.
The sheer volume of celebrities and industry insiders completely choked the intersection. They literally stopped traffic on Sunset Boulevard.
It was an immediate cultural event.
But we must pause here to apply analytical rigor to this explosive launch. We are observing an unprecedented phenomenon in the food space.
The critical question regarding the genesis of the Famous Amos brand is one of causation.
Right. Was the immediate massive success of this brand genuinely driven by the structural quality and innovation of the product itself?
Or was it purely the result of Amos leveraging a massive Rolodex of Hollywood connections, capitalizing on his geographic proximity to the A&M Records offices, and just manufacturing a trendy novelty for the entertainment elite?
Because if you casually review the guest lists for his subsequent promotional events, you have Andy Warhol eating the cookies, you have Muhammad Ali posing for photos with Amos. It is incredibly easy to write this off as a pure vanity project.
It looks like a masterclass in celebrity proximity rather than culinary innovation.
It does.
However, the historical data and the specific culinary mechanics contradict that assumption entirely. The product itself was a genuine structural disruption of the snack food market.
You have to contextualize the commercial baking industry in the mid-1970s to understand what Amos actually achieved.
The consumer market was entirely dominated by mass-produced, chemically stabilized goods.
Nabisco had launched Chips Ahoy just 12 years prior. Refrigerated slice-and-bake dough had been a supermarket staple since the 1950s.
The standard bakery cookie of that era, whether bought in a store or a commercial bakery, was engineered for maximum shelf life and minimum production cost.
They were large, soft, pumped full of air, and packed with artificial preservatives, hydrogenated oils, and synthetic flavorings.
Amos engineered the exact antithesis of the industry standard. He utilized his Andela's foundational recipe, but enforced unyielding premium specifications that destroyed traditional profit margins in favor of absolute quality.
Let's look at the actual composition of the cookie. He mandated the use of 33% semi-sweet chocolate.
Think about the physical mechanics of that ratio. The chocolate content actually exceeded the flour content.
The dough was essentially just a delivery vehicle for the chocolate.
He refused to use shortening. He insisted on pure butter, which drastically alters the melting point and mouthfeel of a baked good.
He mandated the exclusive use of Watkins pure vanilla extract, completely rejecting cheaper synthetic vanilla.
And most critically for the supply chain, there were absolutely zero preservatives.
Furthermore, the physical architecture of the cookie was a deliberate rejection of the status quo. Amos actively despised large, soft cookies.
His product was engineered to be crisp, densely textured, crunchy.
And critically, small enough to be consumed in 1 or 2 bites.
Every single cookie in those early years was dropped by hand onto the baking sheets. This meant that each cookie possessed an irregular, individualized shape bearing the physical evidence of human labor.
He created a zero-preservative, fiercely artisanal product in an era defined by industrial homogenization and chemical additives.
He did not just bake a cookie. He essentially invented the boutique cookie market category.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the uncompromising quality of the physical cookie was only half of the equation.
The other half was an absolute masterclass in brand personification, a strategy drawn directly from his years representing Diana Ross and Marvin Gaye.
Amos essentially took his sophisticated skills as a talent agent and applied them to baked goods.
He did not treat the cookie as a food product. He treated the cookie as his newest, most demanding celebrity client.
The archival promotional materials from the late 70s perfectly illustrate this mechanism. Amos actually created a literal biography for the cookie, a backstory designed to build parasocial attachment with the consumer.
He commissioned professional headshots of the cookie, as if it were an actor submitting for a role.
On the promotional press packets he handed out to investors and buyers, the bottom left corner featured the William Morris Agency logo.
And the bottom right corner featured an A&M Records logo.
This visually suggested that the cookie had already secured top-tier agency representation and a coveted record deal.
Within the Sunset Boulevard store itself, the swinging door leading back to the hot kitchen was marked with a gold star, explicitly serving as the cookie's official dressing room.
And while the cookie was the client, Wally Amos himself became the ultimate, inescapable hype man.
If you look at modern marketing, you see thousands of influencers attempting to merge their personal identity with a consumer product.
Wally Amos established that exact founder-as-mascot blueprint 50 years ago.
He adopted a strict, unvarying visual uniform to ensure immediate brand recognition in any room he entered. A signature wide-brimmed Panama hat, a gauze-embroidered shirt,
And a kazoo that he would play to cut through the noise of crowded industry events.
He transformed himself into a walking billboard.
There's a documented instance where he arrived at a high-stakes merchandising meeting with Bloomingdale's executives wearing a custom-tailored jumpsuit with a giant Famous Amos cookie embroidered across the entire back.
When he successfully negotiated a premium distribution deal with Neiman Marcus, he didn't use a standard freight delivery service.
He literally drove up to the luxury department store in a rented armored truck, flanked by security, to deliver the first batch of cookies, treating them with the reverence of precious jewels or bullion.
The financial trajectory resulting from this dual-pronged strategy, uncompromising artisanal quality combined with aggressive, highly theatrical marketing, was nothing short of staggering.
In its first 12 months of operation, starting in 1975, a single independent storefront located in a severely depressed neighborhood generated $300,000 in top-line revenue.
The following year, leveraging the momentum of the Hollywood elite, sales eclipsed $1 million.
By 1982, just 7 years after Marvin Gaye handed him that initial $10,000 check, the Famous Amos Cookie Company was generating $12 million in annual revenue.
The cultural saturation of the brand was absolute. Famous Amos moved aggressively beyond the confines of the Sunset shop, securing placement in luxury retailers and high-end department stores.
Effectively elevating a common, blue-collar snack into a coveted gourmet status symbol.
Amos himself became a fixture of American media. He appeared prominently in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade for 5 consecutive years, riding floats from 1977 to 1981.
He made scripted guest appearances as himself on massive, culturally defining television shows like The Jeffersons and Taxi.
The integration of the brand into the cultural zeitgeist was so complete that by 1980, his signature Panama hat and embroidered shirt were inducted into the permanent collection of the Smithsonian National Museum of American History.
He was, arguably, one of the first true food personalities in American media, predating the Food Network era by decades.
This represents the absolute apex of the peak phase.
But if we are to adhere to the mandate of this deep dive, we must now transition our forensic analysis away from the cultural dominance. We have to focus heavily on the severe operational deficits that triggered the brand's catastrophic collapse.
The transition from peak to dust is not a slow fade. It is rapid, brutal, and driven entirely by the unforgiving laws of corporate scaling.
The expansion of the late 70s and early 80s required massive capital expenditure and incredibly sophisticated supply chain logistics.
Moving from a single storefront where cookies are baked and sold in the same room to a national distribution network is a logistical nightmare.
To keep up with a demand that required producing 6 tons of cookies every single week, Famous Amos had to open 2 massive manufacturing plants, one in Van Nuys, California, and another in Nutley, New Jersey.
They began opening international franchises in Asia.
But by 1984, the sheer gravitational weight of this rapid, debt-fueled expansion was suffocating the operational infrastructure of the company.
The financial reports from 1985 strip away the glamour of the brand and reveal the brutal economic reality.
In that fiscal year, despite generating $10 million in top-line revenue, the Famous Amos Cookie Company reported a net operating loss of $300,000.
The company was rapidly hemorrhaging cash. The logistics of distributing a preservative-free product on a global scale were resulting in massive spoilage, high return rates, and crushed profit margins.
And the financial distress was not safely contained within the corporate ledgers. The liability bled directly into the founder's life.
Wally Amos himself was in absolute personal financial ruin.
Despite being the face of a $10 million brand, he had fallen 15 months behind on his own personal mortgage payments, and ultimately lost his home to foreclosure.
This forces a deeply uncomfortable investigation into the leadership failures that allowed a widely beloved high-revenue empire to collapse into insolvency.
How does a company with that much dominant market share, that much celebrity backing, and that much cultural goodwill fail so spectacularly on a functional level?
What's fascinating here is the psychological trap of the visionary entrepreneur. It is a recurring pathology in the business world.
The exact psychological traits that allowed Wally Amos to build the empire from nothing, his boundless irrational optimism, his impulsivity, his unshakable belief in the power of his own narrative, were the precise traits that caused its structural destruction.
Amos was a visionary marketer, an unparalleled promoter. But he possessed a fatal, documented lack of operational discipline and financial acumen.
He managed a massive manufacturing and distribution network on instinct and charisma, not on data, logistics, and spreadsheets.
To his credit, he possessed the self-awareness to admit this, though the realization came far too late.
In a remarkably candid, somewhat tragic interview with the Los Angeles Times in 1985, as the walls were closing in, he stated, and I quote, "My responsibility, as I see it, is keeping our visibility level very high. The thing that got us in trouble is when I tried to actually run the business. That's not what I want to do. I'm a promoter."
And this vacuum of operational discipline at the executive level left the company highly vulnerable to aggressive, structurally sound competition.
Because Famous Amos had successfully proved the immense financial viability of the boutique cookie market, ruthless competitors flooded the space he created.
Mrs. Fields' Original Cookies, founded in 1977 by Debbie Fields, expanded with lethal efficiency.
Unlike Amos, Mrs. Fields utilized highly sophisticated proprietary data-driven management software systems to meticulously control inventory, labor cost, and quality across hundreds of mall locations simultaneously.
David's Cookies opened over 150 locations using standardized, scalable models.
Simultaneously, massive conglomerates like Nabisco and Duncan Hines, recognizing the shift in consumer preference, began launching their own heavily funded upmarket lines to crowd Famous Amos off the premium grocery shelves.
Amos was completely outmaneuvered on a logistical battlefield he didn't fully understand.
To keep the lights on in the manufacturing plants, to meet payroll, and to service the mounting debt, he utilized the only lever he had left. He continually diluted his own equity to raise emergency capital.
If you think of a company's total ownership as a pie, equity dilution is the process of slicing that pie into thinner and thinner pieces to hand out to new investors in exchange for cash.
You might get the money to buy flour for the week, but you own slightly less of the bakery.
Amos did this repeatedly. He brought in outside investors who, in his own words, gobbled up more of my share until all of a sudden I found I had lost all ownership in the company I founded.
This brings us to the first critical, irreversible fracture in the ownership timeline.
In February 1985, facing the immediate threat of complete corporate bankruptcy and the foreclosure of his personal home, Amos made a desperate move.
He sold a 51% controlling stake in the Famous Amos Cookie Company to Bass Brothers Enterprises, a highly capitalized, sophisticated investment family from Fort Worth, Texas.
And the purchase price for absolute control of this massive cultural phenomenon, a mere $1.1 million.
Stop and look at the math of that transaction. $1.1 million for the controlling stake of an enterprise that was generating $12 million in top-line revenue just 3 years prior.
It is an astonishing collapse in valuation.
His son, Sean, succinctly summarized the tragedy of the move, noting that his father sold it to save it.
It is a moment in corporate history that demands speculative analysis. If we connect this to the bigger picture of how sustainable enterprises are built, we have to wonder about alternate timelines.
What if Amos had recognized his severe operational deficiencies in 1978 at the height of his cultural power?
What if, instead of waiting for a liquidity crisis and diluting his equity for emergency cash injections, he had proactively partnered with a seasoned supply chain executive?
What if he had hired a ruthless, operationally minded chief operating officer to manage the logistics of the Van Wise plant?
He might have retained his controlling equity, maintained the premium quality of the product, and built a sustainable, scalable infrastructure capable of fending off the sophisticated onslaught of Mrs. Fields.
But his entrepreneurial infallibility, the very arrogance required to start the company, prevented him from yielding operational control to experts until the math forced his hand.
And the Bass Brothers transaction was not a stabilizing rescue. It was merely the opening act in a dizzying, exhaustive succession of corporate buyouts that would systematically strip the brand of its soul.
The Bass brothers were financiers, not bakers. They quickly realized that attempting to run a struggling, operationally messy bakery operation was a drain on their resources and not worth their time.
Later that exact same year, in late 1985, they flipped their controlling interest for $5 million to an investor group led by Sidney Kimmel, a powerful New York garment industry executive, and former California Senator John Tunney.
Kimmel and Tunney recognized the bleeding in the retail sector and attempted a massive strategic pivot.
They halted the expensive expansion of standalone franchise stores. They tried to push the Famous Amos product aggressively into national supermarket distribution.
But they lacked the leverage to secure premium shelf space against the entrenched grocery behemoths. The product's short shelf life continued to destroy margins, and they failed entirely to turn a profit.
So the asset is distressed again, and it is passed to the next buyer.
In 1987, the Kimmel and Tunney investor group cuts their losses and cashes out, selling the brand to the Bear family, an investment group based in Denver.
The Bears attempt their own turnaround strategy to right the ship, but they encounter the exact same structural headwinds.
Within a year, they are actively looking for an exit strategy. In December 1988, a leveraged buyout firm based in San Francisco called the Shansby Group purchases the Famous Amos company.
We must pause to examine the specific financial mechanics of a leveraged buyout or an LBO and the valuation of this specific deal.
The Shansby Group purchased the company for an estimated $3 million.
By this point in 1988, Wally Amos's equity was virtually non-existent. He had been relegated to a mere figurehead, a contractually obligated, paid spokesperson pulling a salary of $200,000 a year to wear his hat and smile for the cameras.
But the Shansby Group didn't buy the company to bake premium cookies.
An LBO firm typically acquires a distressed company using a significant amount of borrowed money with the intention of aggressively cutting costs, restructuring operations to maximize short-term cash flow, and flipping the asset for a massive profit.
They had a very specific, highly clinical strategy for the Famous Amos brand.
They installed a new chief executive officer, a man named Keith Lively, and together, the Shansby Group systematically dismantled the foundational vision that Wally Amos had built.
Under Shansby's control, Famous Amos ceased entirely to be a premium, handmade boutique item. They executed a brutal, unsentimental, mass-market repositioning.
They immediately closed the expensive, low-margin retail shops. They officially stopped attempting to compete with Mrs. Fields in the gourmet, high-end space.
Instead, they pushed the recognizable brand name into high-volume, low-margin distribution channels.
They aggressively targeted the vending machine sector, which rapidly became their highest area of growth.
They pushed massive bulk orders into warehouse food clubs, flooded neighborhood convenience stores, and even struck a corporate alliance to sell miniaturized versions of the cookies in Burger King restaurants.
But you cannot put a zero-preservative pure butter cookie into a vending machine. The supply chain economics simply do not allow it.
To achieve the profit margins required for those low-end channels, and to survive the temperature fluctuations of a warehouse club or a vending machine, Shansby had to intentionally degrade the product.
The legendary recipe of Aunt Della, the pure butter, the massive chocolate ratio, the lack of preservatives was completely erased.
They replaced pure butter with cheaper, shelf-stable hydrogenated oils.
They pumped the dough with artificial preservatives to extend the shelf life from days to months.
They even introduced caramel coloring into the dough. If you want to understand the mechanics of mass food production, caramel coloring is often used to artificially mimic the rich golden brown hue that naturally occurs when pure butter and high-quality sugars caramelize in an oven.
They were using chemicals to paint a picture of quality that no longer existed. They sacrificed the absolute soul of the product for scalable profit.
Amos himself, forced to watch this as a paid employee, would later publicly call what they were selling a disgrace to cookies, stating with profound bitterness, "You cannot eat the bag. What's inside the bag is what matters, and what they sell is not my cookie."
The economics of this deliberate product degradation, however, were highly, undeniably lucrative for the holding company.
Let us look at the financial result of this strategy in the next transaction.
In the fall of 1992, exactly 4 years after buying the distressed company for roughly $3 million, the Shansby Group sold Famous Amos to the President Baking Company.
Wait, I have to interrupt this timeline because we need to interrogate the fundamental logic of that math.
It is hard to believe.
You were telling me that the Shansby Group bought a distressed asset for $3 million. They actively ruined the core product's recipe, they closed all the premium retail storefronts, and they turned a gourmet item into vending machine fodder. And then they turned around and sold it 4 years later for $61 million.
Yes.
That is a staggering 5,000% premium. It's a 55 times multiplier of what Wally Amos initially sold his controlling stake for.
Right.
That math defies basic logic. Why would the President Baking Company pay $61 million for a degraded product?
It is a vital question, and the answer lies in the separation of physical assets from intellectual property.
Okay.
In the realm of corporate acquisitions and mass-market consumer packaged goods, the physical quality of the cookie is entirely secondary to the psychological power of the brand.
The Shansby Group didn't sell a bakery. They sold an intellectual property asset.
They bought the brand awareness, the staggering 60% national name recognition that Wally Amos had spent a grueling decade building through sheer charisma, television appearances, and aggressive promotion.
Shansby stripped away the expensive overhead of retail storefronts and the margin-crushing cost of premium ingredients, and they attached that highly trusted, deeply recognizable logo to a cheap, highly scalable, mass-produced commodity.
When the President Baking Company, which was the nation's fourth largest cookie distributor and the massive industrial producer behind Girl Scout cookies, looked at Famous Amos in 1992, they weren't looking to buy a gourmet bakery.
They were buying a vending machine cash cow.
They were buying a fully optimized distribution network with a famous, deeply trusted face printed on every single bag. They paid $61 million for the ghost of the goodwill that Wally Amos had created.
And once the brand was proven as a high-margin mass-market commodity, the corporate consolidation only accelerated into the stratosphere.
In 1998, Keebler purchased the President Baking Company, taking full ownership of the Famous Amos brand in a massive deal valued at $450 million.
Just 3 years later, in 2001, the Kellogg Company bought Keebler in a staggering transaction worth over $4.4 billion.
And finally, tracing the lineage to the modern era, in 2019, Ferrero, the massive Italian confectionery conglomerate behind Nutella, bought Keebler and the Famous Amos brand from Kellogg for $1.3 billion.
Through every single one of these multi-million and multi-billion-dollar boardroom transactions, the brand generated immense wealth for corporate shareholders, while remaining entirely legally divorced from its creator.
Which brings us to the deepest, most profound tragedy of the dust phase of this historical analysis.
Wally Amos did not just lose his equity. He did not just lose the financial upside of his creation.
Through the mechanics of trademark law, he lost the legal right to use his own identity in the marketplace.
Let's trace the timeline of his legal erasure. By 1989, Amos was completely unable to stomach the ongoing degradation of his Aunt Della's recipe.
Relegated to the humiliating role of a powerless, costumed employee within his own legacy, he made the agonizing decision to walk away completely.
He severed ties with the Shansby Group and signed a standard 2-year non-compete agreement.
When that legal restriction finally expired in 1991, Amos attempted to do the only thing he knew how to do. He attempted to re-enter the premium cookie market that he had practically invented.
He formulated a new recipe and tried to launch a new, independent brand called Wally Amos Presents Hazelnut Cookies.
The corporate response from the Shansby Group was immediate, clinical, and utterly merciless.
They filed a massive lawsuit against him for trademark infringement.
To understand how a man can be sued for using his own name, we have to look at the mechanics of the Lanham Act and federal trademark law.
When a personal name acquires what the law calls secondary meaning the public associates that name primarily with a specific commercial product rather than the individual person, it becomes a protectable, transferable intellectual property asset.
Shansby argued, successfully in the eyes of the federal court, that when Amos sold the company, he sold the trademark to his name and his physical likeness in any context related to food packaging.
The legal ruling was absolute. The man who was born Wallace Amos Jr. was legally, permanently forbidden from using his own birth name or any variation of his widely recognized likeness to sell his own baked goods.
"I was stupid, plain and simple," Amos would later recall in interviews, reflecting on the devastating legal reality. I sold the company and didn't realize I had sold my future along with it.
This raises an important question, one that sits at the very heart of this deep dive.
It forces us to examine the chilling intersection of corporate intellectual property rights and fundamental human identity.
The cold mechanics of the law view a trademark as a transferable, non-sentient asset, no different than a patent for a machine or a deed to a warehouse.
But when that trademark is a living, breathing human being, when it is their actual face, their birth name, their personal family history,
The enforcement of that property right requires a profound, deeply unsettling moral severing.
the court essentially ruled that Wally Amos, the living person, was in direct illegal competition with Wally Amos, the corporate asset owned by a holding company.
And the corporation won.
The psychological toll and profound humiliation of that ruling must have been absolute.
The first couple of years after I left Famous Amos, I didn't even make cookies anymore. He confessed to the New York Times, detailing the depths of his exile. I shaved my beard and stopped wearing hats.
He attempted to physically erase the identity that the corporation now legally owned.
But if there is one defining characteristic of Wally Amos, beyond his promotional genius, it is a staggering, almost irrational resilience.
Refusing to be defeated, he forced himself to re-enter the market under a legally mandated, deeply ironic pseudonym. He launched a new company called Uncle No Name, literally, Uncle No Name.
It was a brilliant, tragic commentary on his legal status. But the Uncle No Name venture was plagued by the same operational deficits that haunted his past.
He struggled with severe debt, encountered crippling manufacturing and co-packing issues, and the company was ultimately forced to file for bankruptcy in 1996.
Demonstrating relentless tenacity, Amos then pivoted away from cookies entirely to avoid trademark conflicts, launching Uncle Wally's Muffin Co.
which successfully navigated the operational hurdles and found national distribution in warehouse clubs like Costco.
In 1999, there was a brief, bittersweet, almost surreal reunion. Keebler, having acquired the Famous Amos brand for hundreds of millions of dollars, recognized that the brand had lost its narrative soul.
They reached out to Amos, the man their predecessors had sued into exile, and asked him to return to the company as a paid spokesperson.
Amos agreed to return to the estate he built, but he leveraged his position to demand a condition. They had to improve the degraded recipe.
He forced them to remove the artificial caramel coloring and move the formulation slightly closer to his original premium vision.
But the reconciliation was inherently fractured. He was still merely an employee of his own legacy, taking orders from corporate executives, and he eventually left the company for good to pursue true independence.
His entrepreneurial twilight was a testament to his relentless drive, but it was continually tinged with tragedy and the inescapable shadow of his past success.
He relocated to Hawaii and opened a small independent shop called Chip and Cookie.
He launched another venture called Aunt Della's, named directly after the woman whose Harlem kitchen provided his original sanctuary. Stating to the press, "This is my last company, put that on my tombstone. He died starting one last cookie company."
And remarkably, at the age of 80 in 2016, he appeared on national television on the investment show Shark Tank to pitch a new concept called the Cookie Kahuna.
He stood before the investors, a legend of the industry. But he failed to secure an investment, and the business eventually folded under the weight of thin margins.
Which brings us to the final, most sobering data point in this entire historical post-mortem.
In 2017, the man who pioneered a $12 million boutique empire in the 1970s, the man whose face and recipe generated billions of dollars in subsequent corporate acquisitions for leveraged buyout firms and international conglomerates, launched a GoFundMe campaign on the internet.
He was actively struggling to pay for basic necessities, food, gas, and rent for his apartment.
7 years after that public plea for help, on August 13, 2024, Wallace Amos Jr. died at his home in Honolulu at the age of 88, succumbing to complications of dementia.
His life was a remarkable, undeniable testament to boundless optimism, sheer force of will, and unmatched promotional genius. He changed the landscape of American consumer goods.
But his corporate legacy, the actual financial mechanics of what happened to his creation, is a ledger of harsh, unforgiving extraction. It is a textbook example of how capital consumes authenticity.
So what does this all mean? Why did we spend the last hour forensically dissecting these boardroom transactions?
For you listening, whether you are managing a small side project, scaling a local business, or navigating corporate structures, the peak-to-dust journey of Famous Amos serves as a stark, unavoidable reminder of the laws of commerce.
Visionary marketing, relentless personal enthusiasm, and a genuinely superior disruptive product are incredible necessary assets, but they are absolutely unequivocally not substitutes for operational discipline, financial literacy, and fierce corporate governance.
If you are turning a deeply personal passion into a scalable enterprise, you must implement protective legal and financial measures early.
You must understand the mechanics of equity, the reality of supply chain logistics, and the absolute necessity of maintaining control. Because if you do not understand the math, the machine you build will eventually consume you.
I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought on the concept of borrowed authenticity in the landscape of corporate branding.
If you look at the historical panorama of American food brands, you see faces designed to evoke trust and tradition. Faces like Aunt Jemima or Uncle Ben.
For decades, the public consumed those products, comforted by the imagery. But those were fabricated racial stereotypes, fictional characters created entirely by advertising agencies and corporations to manufacture a false sense of domestic nostalgia and subservient comfort.
But Famous Amos was entirely, fundamentally different. Famous Amos was built on the back of a real, living, breathing Black entrepreneur.
It was his authentic joy, his actual Aunt Della's tangible recipe, his sheer undeniable force of will that built the brand's immense cultural and financial value.
Yet, when the financial leverage shifted, the corporate machine treated that authentic human reality exactly the same way it treated the fabricated, fictional characters.
The holding companies extracted the authenticity they needed to move product, legally separated the living man from his own birth name and personal history, and sold the hollowed-out brand for billions of dollars across decades of clinical boardroom transactions.
It leaves you with a haunting, unresolved question about the nature of modern commerce. When a massive corporation buys a living person's name, their face, and the rights to their personal history, do they actually own the man, or are they just perpetually monetizing the ghost of his success?
You build a towering, magnificent monument. You lay every brick by hand. You put your own face on the cornerstone.
Only to find yourself legally barred under threat of federal lawsuit from ever standing in its shadow. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.